of housekeeping. Oh, thanks, Madison. A couple of housekeeping items first. We do have that Google Doc available for everybody. And Jenna and Greg had some comments about definitions. So Jenna, I don't think we have Greg on the line yet. He did email saying he might be a few minutes late. But if you both can go into that Google Doc and make comments on the definitions that you're hoping to see. Sure. We had someone else go in there. Jim, I think it might have been you, that identified needing the, to definition of a town, things like that. I thought those were great. So we're going to be working on getting those in red line format before the next meeting, so we can come with an updated draft for everybody. Let's see. Definitions, Google Doc comments. Oh, just so everyone knows, there will be no acceptance of technical questions tonight until later in the meeting. Dr. Flewelling was available when I scheduled this meeting, and then Tuesday or so, I think she's emailed me saying she had a brief conflict and she's hoping to make it before the end of the night. So I apologize, I don't have the technical expert available for answering anything that's uber technical, but we can get questions written down and get them answered afterward if she's unable to join us tonight. So I apologize for that inconvenience. And then did anybody have any quick feedback or comments that they wanted to provide before we get started tonight on how things went the last time? And I can try to make adjustments if needed.
The only thing I had a question on was I did make comments on the Google Doc. And are those being, I haven't gone back in since I made the comments, sorry, yep. But sorry, I just stuck a fork underneath my fingernail.
Ouch.
Oh,
yeah, ouch. How are those being responded to, or are they being addressed on the document itself?
I think we were planning to address them on the document itself, but I would take feedback from this group. The reason I thought the document itself is because everybody has access to it and we can all read those.
Okay.
If there's I'm looking for whatever works for everybody here. So if there's a different way for that to work, just let me know and we can try that out as well. And I can continue to send out that Google Doc link for easy access to try to encourage folks to jump on and check that out and make those comments.
Well, I think the feedback on the document would be good. And then that way we can all see what everyone is writing. So
great. Can you repeat that, Shelley? Just make sure I got that again. I said great, but I want to make sure I got the comment.
I have comments on the document as well, so that we can see what everyone is saying.
Okay. Okay, that's great. We will work on that as well. Oh, and just very last piece of housekeeping. Jenna, you sent me a link today regarding a Strong Towns article that I read, and we'll probably need some interpretation. So let's get together later.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I think it was very relevant in a long-term planning, and I think it does affect this ordinance. So
yeah,
I'd be happy to do that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So tonight I was hoping, and I want to thank everybody for filling out the survey. I don't think there's many things in this world more annoying than a survey. So I thank you all for your time. I personally hate them, but it turns out I don't really hate them when they're from me. So thank you all for doing that. I wanted to go down the list and really open up some of these conversations. We already had quite a few of them. Others will be brand new. And I'm hoping we can get some kind of final consensus on a lot of these topics. I thought that a lot of the results were pretty definitive, which hopefully will help, ease the answers in the conversations we're looking for. So with that, I will share my screen so everyone can see the survey. Just so you know, I did not figure out how to pull the survey up in the summary mode and still show the comments. So I will be having the full survey on my screen and hope that you all can see the additional comments that everyone wrote so we can include those in the conversation. In just a second. Okay, hopefully you are looking at my screen with a Q1 showing question 1, should the appointed Historic Preservation Commission be an independent board?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So we got a 86% response rate that it should be an independent board. And just so you all can kind of read the results down here, 15 of you took the survey, 13 said an independent board, and 2 said planning commission. If anybody wants to make a comment to that, Madison and I will be taking notes throughout the meeting to include in our staff memos.
Is there any way you can make the print a little bit bigger?
Stand by. Let's see if I can do that. How's that?
Better.
Okay. I'm not hearing any comments or feedback on independent board. I do think that having an independent board will be helpful for folks who don't have the time to commit to planning commission, which is twice a month.
Michelle, Bill Pierce does have his hand raised.
Oh,
Hey, hi,
sorry.
can you hear me?
Hi, Bill, we can hear you.
Hi, I was one of the people that said that I think that it should be a function of the planning commission. And the reason is that unless there is an application, does it make sense for the group to meet? And secondly, I think as this evolves, we'll see whether or not it should be a separate review process and whether or not we'll ever be in a position where we're contradicting the planning commission with the preservation commission. And anyway, that's just a thought going on, and that's why I felt that it should be a planning commission function and be reviewed all at once rather than getting done with one and then going to another. Anyway, my thought on that. That's why
Thanks so much for sharing that insight. Bill, does
That's why
anyone
you
want to
got
comment to that?
that's why you got 13%.
All right.
Sorry, this is Shelley. One of the reasons that I thought it should be an independent board was due to an application that went before the planning commission in the 100 block. And the comments by members of the planning commission didn't really meet with the character of the area. Putting planters out in front of a 4-story building doesn't quite hit that intent. And that was one of the comments made by a planning commission member. So I wasn't quite sure that the planning commission was looking at the historical context besides the need for redevelopment. So my concern was that it needed to be a separate body.
Thanks, Shelley.
And again, from my point of view, this is Bill again, that I think as we get into this further, we'll see if there is really, it could be whether or not it makes sense to make it a function, add the function to the planning commission review, rather than have a separate reviewing group. Again, it could be, and oftentimes ends up, is my experience, being contradictory. Okay, I'm done.
Anyone else?
I just think it would be a different focus than what Planning Commission already does. And it's important to separate the two. Planning Commission does more, details that have nothing to do with the historic looks and character of it. And I think we could be more focused on that one aspect and take a little bit of workload off of their shoulders.
Thanks,
And possibly do a better job by focusing just on the historicness of it.
Isn't that why we're going through and doing this Historic Preservation Commission? So that it gives it some authority?
Yes. I agree with that.
I appreciate that. I'm confused. We're trying to overdo something that's already being done, but we're establishing a commission so that we can set the regulations and set the power for the commission to do their job.
Correct. I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Jenna?
Yeah, I also, much like Shelley, would prefer that, and I'm on the planning commission. I don't think, and I agree with Kelly as well. I think that the independent board would be focused on exactly what they're tasked to do, and that would be their focus. They're not going to get caught up in, anything else except whatever the design code that comes up for historical features and things of that nature, which gives it a little bit less involvement in the zoning and more focus on making sure that we get the best looking buildings we possibly can get.
Thank you. Okay, if we don't have anybody else, I will keep this moving along and we'll go to question 2. What percentage of the Historic Preservation Commission should be comprised of full-time, and I put in parentheses voting since that's what this group discussed last time, Minturn residents, and we got a response of 40% of you said 80%. And I do want to point out that I received a comment from someone, and I'm so sorry that I forget who, but they were correct that I need to correct the math on this so that 80% actually lines up with the fact that it'll be a 7-member board. So sorry that my math skills are waning, but I will get that corrected before the next iteration of the draft, so that lines up as closely as possible. And thank you again to whoever helped me with that. Okay. If there's no comments, I'm going to move on. Question 3, should Minturn property owners and or Minturn business owners be eligible for consideration? Everybody was in support of that. It was exciting to see, just given that I think we have a lot of folks in town that are really committed to Minturn. I do think that we have some viable comments on this topic. So Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, Ken Halliday, by the way, I'm sorry, I was in and out on the first call due to internet problems, and I'm caught up now and happy to be here. My only comment here is that if the only qualification is property ownership, we might miss folks. Shouldn't it be property ownership and they're actually here in Minturn? That they're not just a remote owner that never has been to Minturn or only comes once a year to check on their property. I was thinking that we should have property owners and business owners who are active in Minturn. I don't know what that definition would be for property owners. Maybe it's that you reside here at least 3 to 4 months a year or something like that. And for business owners, that you're actually operating the business as opposed to that you're an owner, in a far off land. It was said the other night while I was on how important we want to make sure that the commission is made up of folks who understand and what makes Minturn Minturn.
Can we just exclude people from Florida?
There you go.
We're going to keep a clean conversation tonight. How does everyone feel about that? I know that we don't have an actual definition of what would be considered active, but I think that's something that this commission could work on and determine, if it's a 3-month commitment to staying in Minturn or something. Jim, you got a comment?
Yes, I asked, I forget who it was, what the definition of a resident was, because there's a board position or a city council position that's open, and the mayor's position, I guess, will be open is it this year or next year? But anyway, so there is a definition already established that it's someone who actually resides in Minturn. And as he put it, I don't remember his name, but it's where you go at night if you, after work, or where you primarily reside, and where you're registered to, as you're a registered voter in Eagle County. That's also a requirement. So there's 2 things really, that you actually reside primarily in Minturn, and 2, that you're a registered voter in Eagle County.
Can I, and I don't mean to take over the conversation because I know there's other committee members that want to talk, but can I just ask a quick follow-up question, knowing that the primary folks sitting on this commission will be full-time Minturn residents. And this will be for, a couple other seats, one, possibly two other seats, where it's part-time property owners or business owners. Do you have a recommendation on what that definition would be to identify active second or part-time property owners or business owners? What's your thoughts on that? Like if they're not a registered voter here, but they say they're a second homeowner that's here 4 months out of the year. They come for 2 months in the winter and 2 months in the summer, and they're, maybe active and involved in the town. What does that look like to you?
Active and participating in the town to me would be someone that can make it to the meetings in person, that you don't have to schedule a Zoom meeting specifically for, because they're living on the Front Range or Florida or Texas or I don't know, out of the country somewhere. Another way we can look at this as far as the residents, since we get to define the makeup of the board, you could do it where, so let's say we're going to have a 7-member board, 5 have to be full-time registered voters in the town. 1 can be a member of the business community, and 1 could be a member, second homeowner. And then that way you still get the primary people being those that live, work, eat, breathe, sleep, Minturn. And then you still have that offering from the business community and the second homeowners. And you're not building up this board to be, primarily second homeowners or people that, are only here 1 or 2 months a year. To me, people that are only here 1 or 2 months a year, as much as they might like Minturn because they like coming up and getting out of the Front Range and having this as a place to go, that to me isn't a buy-in. You're not committed to the community. So, who knows what's going to happen with the pandemic? We could end up having to have Zoom meetings for the next year, but let's hope not. But if you can make regular meetings, and I think the question, how many should you have? 6 times a year? If you can make it up here 6 times a year as a second homeowner for that meeting and you're that one representative, then I guess you're committed to the town.
Okay.
In that example you just gave, where you had 5 voting residents and then a property owner and a business owner, would you want to have any qualification? The point I'm raising is, would you want a property owner from New York, picking on New York now rather than Florida, that's just here 1 day a year to, check on?
No, I think I agree that they have to be active in the community.
Okay, but what would that definition be?
Like the owner operators of the saloon. I don't believe they live in Minturn, but they're local. They are here. They're running their business.
Yeah, my suggestion would be that we say that they're here. If you're talking about just a property owner, a second owner, that they're here at least 3 or 4 months a year. And if you're a business owner, that they're actually involved in the operation of the business here in town. That would be my only comment. And the other thing I was going to mention, on the prior question, we had a pretty good number that said 80%. But actually there was a larger number of people who said less than 80%. I just wanted to point that out. And so I think we should feel comfortable, with like 5 people that
There's no food.
5 out of 7 or whatever. In other words, if you go down next, there's right there, the numbers of peoples, there was 6 that said 80, and there was actually 6, 8, 9 people that said less than 80. That's all I'm saying. And so I'm just saying that I think we should feel comfortable going down to like 5. That felt pretty good to me. I'm sorry, I don't know everybody's name yet, but whoever was speaking, I agree.
That was Shelley.
Thanks, Shelley.
What does national say on the recommendation for the number of people?
What does who say, Steve?
National, I mean, the
Okay,
National
Steve.
Historical Society has guidelines.
Remember,
Colorado
at the
also
beginning of
has.
the meeting, I said no technical questions.
Okay, I apologize.
But I can
It's a great question,
absolutely,
though. It's a great
I'm happy to look that up for you. I don't mean to be cocky.
My one comment is we should be trying to align ourselves with both the state and the National Historical Society and their guidelines. So if there's a lawsuit that comes up, we are following the guidelines that are set by both those entities. And I think
I'm happy to look
keep
that
in
up.
mind all the way through.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
I'll get back to everybody in a follow-up email on that one. Jim?
Yeah, I think we need to, or I did anyway, I considered that, we're going to have experts also on this commission who may not be residents. So, or we may not be able to get, someone who's a resident to be an expert in a particular area. So it might be worth considering, 5, as was suggested, 5 be residents, and 2, if they're an expert, maybe don't have to be residents.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that I'm pretty, my realization was, and which is ironic since I'm an immigrant, but because it's a volunteer board and not an elected position board, that there's a lot of long-term people that necessarily can't register to vote. I just didn't want to have that as a criteria because they are important members of our community. I want to encourage people that, maybe weren't born here, but have lived here for 15, 20 years to be on this particular committee because their vote, air quotes, counts as well.
Thanks, Jenna.
I would agree with that also. I don't like the idea of some people being not able to qualify because they're not registered to vote or whatever.
Yeah.
From the Hispanic community.
Yep. Thanks, Susan. Okay. I wonder if this will end up being a bit of a balance between the definition of active, as Shelley and Ken put it in, maybe guidelines that we include for when the council is vetting potential applicants, and maybe the preface that you put out there to the public of what the council is looking for when people apply with their letters of interest or whatever the commission decides as a form for applying for this. I wonder if there's something there in the middle to be able to, when they have the interview process, have that come up. How active are you in the community? Daryl, good to see you.
Hi, yes, hi. I like what Shelley said about commitment and involvement. I always think of the situation or the phrase where it's like the chicken and the pig with breakfast. The chicken's involved, but the pig's committed.
How appropriate, given that we passed a chicken ordinance last night. God help me if we get pigs too. Okay, moving on. Should Minturn, yes, we did this one already. We'll move on to question 4. How many meetings should the Historic Preservation Commission tentatively plan for? And this specifically asked about the first year. Was it Bill that identified, in further years, it might change and it might come down, or it might be adjusted. But I think we're all anticipating for the first year, they might need more time to get this up and running. And most 10 of you said 6 times a year. And then 5 of you said other times, 2 more and 3 less. So 6 times seems pretty solid. Question 5, what professions, if any, should be added to the allowed list of, quote, and this is from the draft ordinance, professionals or shall have extensive expertise in a preservation related discipline as identified in section 2C. So a majority of folks, over 90%, felt that building professionals should be included. We had 5 folks, 33% put real estate agents. We had 20% put law enforcement. And then we did have some other responses that included a sustainability professional, an appraiser or a lawyer, and an environmental expert or conservationist. And if anybody wants to speak either to the question in general or the percentages that were brought up or the additional responses, please feel free.
Jim?
Yeah, I put the environmentalist or conservationist because we've got a lot of, we have the river that flows right through the town. And there's a lot of wildlife and, ecological type processes going on within our own community that we don't even realize. And I think building has a big effect on, our environment and the river and the wildlife. So, I wouldn't say it should possibly be a permanent position, but maybe if we need that position, maybe the commission should have the ability to, call upon somebody to serve, at a meeting or two or whatever to share their expertise. But, I would go either way with it. It wouldn't have to be a permanent member. It could just be a consultant who would come in for a meeting or two and, give the commission their expertise. If
And
needed.
that's what the planning commission and council do now, is they get consultants that come in and provide review of documents and applications. So you're on track. Jenna?
Yes, I actually was the one that added the sustainability only because of the building materials and seeing if there are, they might have expertise on solar integrated product that looks historic that we didn't know about or something of that nature. So just trying to make, get more bang for the buck out of what we're looking at when it comes down to rebuilding or enhancing a structure, that it also is something that is of better quality or maybe of technology that takes some of that reliance off of, utilities and so forth.
Right. Does anyone have any opposition to any of the additional professions that have been included, either through the answer choice options or through the responses?
I'm not sure about law enforcement.
I agree. What would that mean?
Does whoever put in law enforcement as one of their answers, you want to talk about that?
Wasn't law enforcement one of the original choices given?
It was one of those that shows up in the, as an extra example in the guide that we were originally provided when we were
Exactly.
setting this up. I think that's why it showed up there, was because
Okay.
they were originally listed in that guide. Some of these, I understand, totally get why Jenna and Jim are saying what they are about the environmental and the sustainability. But in a lot of cases, both of those can be managed through the building code, especially the sustainability. Once the town of Minturn starts upping the codes that it's on, the environmental and sustainability side really getting tightened down, especially in the 2021 codes. So those are things to also consider. The more people we add to this, the farther outside of town of Minturn we potentially have to go. And again, if they don't have the buy-in to Minturn, I don't want them on. I don't think we have to have someone like that on the board if they don't, live, breathe, work, sleep, eat, drown Minturn. So, the farther out we go and have these requirements, the less opportunity for Minturn residents to actually qualify for the job.
Okay.
I think we should stick to the history part and kind of just focus on that small part, because I think the rest of the planning department pretty much covers all the other stuff that's necessary.
So then what I see from the results of this survey is we should add building professionals to the list. And it
Yeah.
looks like everything else
Agreed.
could be brought in as a consultant. Is that how
Yeah.
everyone feels?
Yep.
Okay. Madison, will you get that down?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on. Oh, and I just want to say thank you. Dr. Flewelling just joined us. So Steve, you're welcome to ask as many technical questions as you'd like now.
I was going to say,
Appreciate it.
it is legal professionals, not law enforcement. That's in the CLG handbook, excuse me.
Oh, thank you. Legal professional.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I think it does just say law, but it means, yeah.
You meant, it meant
lawyers.
legal, not police.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Question 6. What is the minimum target age of the architectural demographic Minturn is looking to preserve? And this really came up because, you know, we lost the building, I just call it the Mountain Peddler building, you know, and it was over 50 years old. And I think we had a lot of folks come to the council and say, hey, you know, we need to be knowing about these things and seeing what we can do about it if it's over X years old. And we really needed to hone that in. So what we see from the results is 66% or 10 people said 75 years and older, 5 people or 33% said 50 years and older. So we'll see what you all have to say about that, Steve.
My comment once again to Lindsay would be, should we not be aligning ourselves with national and the state on these issues? Because if one person comes in and says, we're not happy with what Minturn has told us, we're going to the State Historical Society, and we're going to the National Historical Society. Those two pretty much align with themselves, correct?
Yeah, so national and state, the accepted, generally accepted
Oh, she is eating. Okay.
time is 50 years for properties. Some local governments do have different time periods that they consider, but often it would be more in your design guidelines that you would have the exact period of significance laid out rather than in your ordinance. But you can have your own, you could put it at 75 years if that was what was desired. It's just the national register, nationally accepted standard is 50 years. I would say, you can be on the national and state register and also listed locally. The national and state register don't provide any specific protections over properties. So if properties are on the national and state register, you would want them to be locally listed anyway.
Ken?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with the comment Jim just made, and also just say that, look, what we're talking about here, I think, is just at what point does the commission get involved and at least look at the property? This doesn't mean that it's going to be deemed historic if it's 50 years old. But I think if we put it at 75, we might miss some really cool buildings in town that are of significance and important to the fabric and culture of the town. And so I think that 50 would make more sense, just again, to get a look at the building without being a rule that is definitive in any way.
And it can be considered under other criteria.
Exactly.
I currently just don't know of any buildings that are significant past World War II. Personally, we don't have any mid-century modern. I think the 50-year was developed to protect mid-century modern buildings like the Sleeper House in Genesee. And as far as I personally know, I can't think of anything past World War II that is super worth saving historically.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was just gonna bring up that I agree with Kelly from last time. I was hoping the survey would have a genre, and I think that's more applicable to what you're getting at, Kelly, with a certain type of desirable architectural style versus just something being old.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to protect our roots in the Victorian mining era. I think we don't have any mid-century. There was some houses built, but I don't think they're anything quite special since the economic level in this town was so deprived past World War II. And you could say that about the 30s too, but my house was 1937. And I like it.
Well, that's persuasive.
I threw a map up on the screen. You know, we're also going through the community plan update. And as part of that, they're looking at really everything to do with the town. And they put this together as part of their background work that they're doing that shows the 100 block building footprint and the age of the buildings within the 100 block in a range format. So this kind of helps give an overview of the age ranges we have just in this one section of town, if that's helpful at all. I heard an alternative option to dates, which is a genre. Lindsay, do you have thoughts on that? Does that become too vague? Do other towns do that instead of dates?
I mean, normally you have a specific, 50 years. Some places have 30 years where you start to look at properties, and then you have categories underneath that the properties also meet.
Okay.
So then those could be like the areas of significance that you're looking for in the property. So you would have an area of significance that could be like considered a genre. That would be in addition to the 50-year or 75-year cutoff.
Okay. I don't necessarily mean to put you on the spot, but Susan Morrison, if you're available, I'd love your feedback on this one, specifically the age range. Oh, well, then I'll come back to Susan later. But this was a big issue when it came up, and folks really did want to know when something was going to be considered for demolition. And so I think it's important we get a solid age. Tom, do you have any thoughts on this? Tom Sullivan?
No, I'm with Susan. She's having technical difficulties.
Oh, no worries.
You can talk on my computer. Hang on.
Okay. Thanks.
Sorry.
Sorry, I'm listening in a different room, but I couldn't get it up.
You can just talk.
Is it on?
Yeah, you're talking.
Okay, so we were talking about the age range of the buildings, right?
Yep. Uh-huh.
I think I picked 70. I picked 50 actually. I think that was my initial choice.
Okay.
Which I think is a good range. And I think I agree with what was said. In fact, that there's a lot of buildings, not necessarily how old they are. We definitely have old buildings that maybe don't fall into any criteria for Minturn. And then we have some buildings I think that are not as old that would also fall into the character of Minturn as well. So
okay.
I think being very specific on just an age is tough.
Yeah. Brian, thank you so much for letting me just randomly call you out.
Yeah, no.
Thank you.
Do you know if the county has, I love this map of the downtown area and the dates. Yep. Is there does the county have something that encompasses the whole town, or is that a goal that we can set maybe?
I think Minturn's going to be trying to get that. I'm hoping that will be part of our work that we do. It'll just take a while to get past the 100 block.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that the important thing to consider is what that age triggers and how it affects somebody's process. So if we're going to meet 6 times a year, so every 2 months, could somebody be waiting 2 months to be able to move forward with a historic nod that says, oh, you're not historic, go ahead on to zoning, on to building. And so I guess for me, the question is, if you put it at 50 instead of 75, are you going to just lock a bunch more people into waiting on historic to go, no problem, go ahead? And is there some kind of mechanism to deal with that on a more regular basis than every 2 months? Or is that fine with everybody, that everybody who wants to to move forward with a project might have to wait 2 months to get looked at.
I hate to create unnecessary grief on a project that really, isn't that important historically, and just make more work for everybody.
And I guess, is there really a means for someone to go to the state and contest that, well, Minturn has a 75-year rule and the state's 50, so I'm going to protest, I'm going to sue, I'm going to somehow override? I don't really believe there's a mechanism to do that.
No, there's separate registers, so you could be on the state or national register and on the local register.
But there's no precedent to override a town's regulations or ordinance based on the state's regulation or ordinance.
No, not as long as you meet all the, legal requirements from the Colorado revised statutes, but that wouldn't have anything to do with the state register.
Jim?
Yeah, I was in favor of 75 years because going through the document that was put together for the commission, there's a section in there on low interest loans and grants. The city would set up a revolving type program so that people that own businesses or homes could get grants or loans through the city. And I was thinking, well, that, do we want a 50-year-old building to really qualify for a grant or a loan? I was thinking that might easily deplete the fund if we have too many, buildings that qualify, and somebody that really had a 75-year-old historically significant building could not then get any help if that fund is depleted. So I was trying to narrow it down to, in my own mind anyway, what this might cost in terms of that fund being set up, and could it be used effectively if we have too many, requests for buildings that may not be as historically significant as others that are older and, have more history. So that was my reason for thinking 75 might be a good basis for, historic preservation.
Thank you.
Can we go back to the question? Is the question in regards to individual properties, districts, or?
The question is in regards to the establishment of the town register and the designated criteria. So the question is identifying the minimum age requirement of a building to be considered for the Minturn register.
Of a
Historic
specific
register.
building.
Yeah, just to be considered to get on it. Here's the question again. And that's from section 3, subsection 2A of the ordinance.
Okay.
And then Jim, just to get back to your comment as well, the draft ordinance that we're working on is a template from the state. We're really thankful to have it. The funding mechanism that's identified in the back of the template is also from the state. And I think the council will have to take a hard look at the ability of Minturn and Minturn's budget and what it would look like to fund such an opportunity as is identified in the ordinance. Maybe that's something where we can, take in donations or something. I have concerns about our budget and addressing that. So that'll be another topic that'll come up. Ken?
Hey, Michelle, can you put that map back up? I just wanted to take one more quick run at this. It looks like that one orange building right there across from the, that one. If we used 75 years, that would not be included. So does that mean that could get a demo permit and come brand new?
Not necessarily, no. So this is regarding eligibility to be on the register. And there's an entirely separate section in our ordinance. And it's one of the questions that we'll get to later that identifies the minimum age for consideration prior to demolition. Lindsay,
But
Do I
my
have that
question
right,
is,
Lindsay?
yeah, let's, you know, I know that provision's in there, but let's
Okay.
say that they get approval for demolition, but the historic that historic district is so important. Will the Historic Preservation Commission have any say in what gets built there? If we have
Well,
more than 50 years, if we use 75 years, for
first of
example.
all, the Historic Preservation Commission would have to approve the demolition.
Right.
And then I do believe in the demolition criteria in the ordinance, it identifies you have to have a plan in place for what'll be replacing the building, but I look to Lindsay to help with that.
Yeah.
So it also depends on if you have a historic district or if you're just doing individual landmarks. So if you have a historic district in that 100 block area, then the Historic Preservation Commission would be able to make, well, they would have certificates of appropriateness for any demolition or infill. Even
What
if the
about
property.
rebuild? What about the rebuild? Would they have say on the rebuild so that it was in character with?
If you guys want to, you can have design guidelines that cover infill in the historic district. So that would cover any, you know, design characteristics for rebuilds for sure. So if you have a district there that includes that property, then the HPC would have to give approval for the final form and design of the new building.
Yeah, my only concern is if we go to 75 years, do we lose any control within the historic district on rebuild? That's really where I was going. And maybe we don't. If we don't, then I'm not worried about using the 75 years.
As long as it's a historic district, you would have control over it. If you're just doing individual landmarks, then you don't have control over it as closely.
Okay.
It would still have to follow under your zoning and things like that.
So where does the 50 or 75 years really apply if we have a historic district?
So it's mainly for the local landmark list. So
So if we go out of the district.
Yeah.
So we got the 200 block and the 300 block, if we're going to start designating houses as landmarks.
Correct.
Okay.
Or if you decided you didn't want to have a district at all and you just wanted individual landmarks, then that would apply.
Right, because Brian, if you take a look at this list and you look at so here's the Bellum house. Here we have an 1898 house right here on the corner across from the Scarab. Then we have a newer house. And then we have this tiny little house right here. And I swear, I think it's from like 1887.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, they're on the 200 blocks. So people may or may not feel that's, I don't want to use the word worthy, but inclusive of what we're going for here. So.
And I do question about the antique store. From my knowledge, the orange one, it's an original building. I think it used to be a liquor store in the 1900, but it got remodeled with the apartments built above. But I think the guts of the building are from the turn of the century, as far as I know.
That's interesting. I'll let the team know that, the SE group. Maybe they just went off the assessor's page that maybe wasn't complete. I don't know. So I'll let them know. Thanks.
I guess understanding what we've just talked about a little better, I missed the survey. I apologize. So I'm an additional vote for the 50 year to match the state guidelines, because it does, even though we don't have any mid-century modern, there are some cooler old houses that have been built and infilled along the way that, you know, whether it's the 200 block or the 400 block, that may just be missed if we don't have a more inclusive kind of catch basin for what gets taken a look at outside of the 100 block historic district. And I'm just going to say, we've spent a lot of time on this one subject. I feel like we need to get it to a vote, maybe of some sort, or another vote or something.
It might be worth getting a list of people's favorite buildings. When I moved to Minturn, we did our least favorite buildings and our most loved buildings, and the whole town took a survey. And I don't know if we could do that again, but the reason I was so upset about the Mountain Peddler was that was voted everyone in town's favorite building back 20 years ago.
All right,
And
we're gonna
that
go
might-
with Brian's recommendation. What does everyone think? And Kelly, we can do that list as well. But for years, I mean, I need to 75, 50. This is just to be considered to go on Minturn's register list. This is not for demolition. This is to be considered on the list.
Yep.
Gemma?
As long as it's create a burden.
I just have a question as far as now we've got a, everyone loves plan view, look at the buildings and the footprints thereof. Is this same task force that's doing the comp plan? Are they taking photos and inventorying these buildings from, front, side, rear, etc.?
So they're not doing a full historical survey, and we have done, I think it was back in 2005, the town did a very simplified survey of all the properties in town with, I think, just front views.
Okay.
And I think we can share that link. It's a pretty big document. But I think we have access to share that link if people are interested in seeing that as well. But I'm forcing a vote right now.
Okay.
I propose 50 years.
Do I have a second?
A second 50.
Okay. I'm gonna assume everyone's in favor unless you raise your hand on the little raise hand option. And if you raise your hand, that means you're against it. Okay, I think everybody's in favor except Bill.
I don't know what happened that the whole age changed, but anyway, I do think that there was some validity to the 70 years that was voted on the survey, but I don't think it matters that much.
Yeah, I voted 75, but I think that I like what Lindsay said about the whole, sub criteria that goes with that 50 years, and that narrows it down. I could accept that. If it's just a straight linear year, I would hesitate to be in favor, but I think that's the direction we're going to go. So.
Okay. And again, this is only to be considered to be on the list. This isn't regarding demolition.
Mm-hmm.
So then maybe we just circle back to what kind of wording we look at if we're going to have sub criteria on there, and if that's maybe something the Historic Preservation Commission can do after they've been formed.
The sub criteria is suggested in that section 3, part 2.
Oh,
association with events, connection with significant people, distinctive characteristics for the architecture, geographic importance, so like landmarks in the city, and then archaeology.
Okay.
So those are right underneath that 50-year sentence in the model ordinance.
Got it. All right, Jim, and then we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, I'm not against the 50 years. I just want to be clear that this 50-year designation applies to the whole town, not just to the historic district. Am I correct?
I would look to Lindsay, but I believe that's correct.
Okay.
Whew, we're moving on. What percentage of property owners are needed to object to the formation of an historic district? And we've got a wide array of answers, but 8 of you, or 53%, said 60%. Anybody have huge opposition to going with 60%? I'm going to move on. What constitutes adjacent properties? This gets sticky from a staff standpoint. Immediate, properties within 100 feet, properties within 250 feet, or more than 250 feet. And 53% said immediate, adjacent properties and directly across the street. Brian, you want to comment on that one? You're muted.
sorry, on the last one, I was just going to suggest that close to 60% might be using a supermajority there. Just to assure that you don't have any kind of a deadlock around it, but it's a minor thing.
Madison, let's make a note on that. So
Just I may be wrong on that, but I think that might be the more sure way to do it.
Okay,
Even though it raises a few percentage points.
thank you. And then Jim, is your comment on the adjacent properties question?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't get my hand up in time about the 60%.
No problem.
Just to clarify, is that all residents of Minturn, or is that within the immediate area of the historic district or building?
I would look to Lindsay, but I believe it's just in the area that's being considered for the historic designation.
Yeah, so normally, yeah, you're exactly right. Normally it's just the property owners in the
Okay, good.
boundaries.
Okay, so I have another question. Doesn't one person own most of the 100 block?
Well, actually, Lindsay, I'm gonna bring that map up again because I think that does bring up a good point. So when you take a look at our 100 block as an example, we have one property owner that owns, and I'm making this up because I don't know the number, but let's say they own 40% of the
Wow.
buildings you see here on this. Brian, don't be difficult. But let's say they own maybe more than 40%, but they definitely own a lot. How does that work? Do they just get one vote or do they get one vote per property?
I guess that's a legal question.
Right.
So you'd have to talk with your attorney about that. I'm not
Okay.
totally
I think it's going to go however we write it. So I mean, when you do voting rights in a condo, for example, you can do it based on square footage, or you can do it based per unit. So there's lots of ways you can designate it, but I think that is a definite consideration. And I wonder, again, now bringing this up, if maybe per Jim's question, it makes more sense that the whole town can vote on it, and it's a percentage of the votes that are made, the votes that are cast, not just the district.
I think we're gonna have to get legal involved on this one.
I like that idea, Brian. I like that.
I don't.
It is about
I don't-
the town.
Local elections are extremely expensive to run. And we only have one election, one local election every 2 years. So to ask the entire town to vote on a historical designation, as these are being determined, could get extremely expensive for the town. They're not cheap. So I completely disagree unless you're going to do this once, that it should be a townwide election, because the town doesn't have the money for special elections.
I would just say, though, that the chances of this ever happening are really low. And the fact that we have such a prominent owner of our historic district, I mean, prominence in terms of number of buildings, et cetera, that it's a real issue for the town. Somehow we have to, if it really was a situation where 5 years down the road, we want to abandon the historic district, that's a really big deal for the town. It's unlikely to ever happen, but if it did.
But are you going to have them to vote? I mean, because there's likely to be more than one historic area. These aren't going to all be.
Well, maybe we just maybe we just target it for this district.
And that would make sense, but it's, then we better get on the ball, because we have an election coming up in April that we need to publish for. So otherwise we're going to be looking at a special election. And
Michelle, can you put the language back up? I thought this was just to actually undo a historic district.
no.
The question is, how many property owners must oppose the historic district?
To object to formation.
Right.
So this
So
is
when
at the
you're trying to
beginning.
form it.
This is at the beginning.
Shelley, I completely understand your concern, but to me, if you don't have the whole town have the ability to vote on the historic districts, you defeat the whole purpose of this committee, or of the formation. Well, yeah, because I think you've been the one driving that you have to be a resident of the town to even be involved in this. And then if you take the residents of the town and you don't allow them to be part of either objecting or supporting the formation of the districts, only the people that live in that block, it changes the
Okay,
character of
but
what we're
why
doing.
why should what you say, and I don't know where you live, Brian, but why should you be allowed to tell me what I can do with my property in the 100 block? I mean, that's
Because
something that,
because I'm a resident of Minturn. That's the whole point. That
okay,
you
but
made.
I own a property in the 100 block, and now you want to tell me what I can and cannot do with that property.
Well, should the historic committee only be people that live in the 100 block?
No, but if you are saying that the entire town gets to decide whether or not the 100 block becomes a specific designation, it has huge implications for those people that own property in the 100 block.
No,
I
this
understand
is
that.
just in the
I think
case.
No,
it
but what you're saying is that your vote should mean more than my property rights in that 100 block. And that's where I completely disagree with you. My vote should count the same as anyone else in the 100 block.
I'm pretty sure that the gentleman who owns that 30 or 40 or 50% of the 100 block is going to object to this designation in the first place. So this committee and this formation is pretty much dead in the water if we don't make it a town effort.
Well, I'm sure
And-
his architect is feeding every piece of information that we're talking about to him, since his architect is sitting on this committee.
Which is why
However-
he's sitting on this committee.
Which I, again.
And I understand that, and I respect that, and I get it. This does have a lot to do with people's financial investment. I mean,
I want to thank everybody for their input on this one. It's clearly a big one. And I think we're going to need to get some legal help on directions that this can go before we can really have an honest conversation on this. So I'm going to move on to the next question. And I've made a note for Madison and I to get legal involved to give us some more direction, and then come back to the committee with more comments and feedback from the committee once we're able to give you legal input. So thank you, everybody. That's going to be one for an upcoming discussion. Regarding the best way to notice a hearing, and we asked you to rank these in order of most to least effective.
Michelle, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
did we get consensus on question 8?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thanks, Madison. Are we all good with, it's kind of close between immediate, adjacent, and directly across the street, and properties within 100 feet? Anybody have a real liking to one versus the other? Otherwise, we'll go with the immediate, and I think we'll need to get that definition in the ordinance for immediate.
I like
So what
that
is-
one.
Reference to, Michelle?
This is in reference to when we notice a hearing.
Okay.
So this is who would get like letters in the mail, as opposed to, is it people that live 100 feet away, 250 feet away? And then, we also post the poster board. And as you'll see, I think in the next question we're asking, should it go in the paper, all those things?
I wasn't 100% sure if that was what you're getting
Yeah.
at, but I thought so. Okay.
Okay.
I missed the vote. I would be for the 100. That's the way I've seen it done in historic districts in Denver. And in my thinking, the further the more you notice, the more people you have involved, the more honest you've been with the process and the notification process. Limiting it just limits the number of people who might have a thought on it. So, and both those are pretty close. So I would lean, that's like two votes different maybe there. And I just made it one vote different, maybe.
Yep. Bill, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I think that the 100-foot thing makes more sense than immediate, because especially when you cross the street, the lots don't align. This one overlaps by 2 feet. We know.
Mhm.
So the 100 feet is a much more definable standard, I think.
People, for my folks in planning departments, I'm looking at Madison and Shelley. Do you guys just use a Google Earth and do a 100-foot radius? Is that what you guys do?
No, we only notify immediately adjacent property owners, so
Okay.
next to and across the street.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
so does Eagle County.
And the way that we do it is through Eagle County GIS. I pretty much just draw lines from corners of the property to see who all falls within the 250 feet.
Okay,
Yeah, so Minturn is 250 feet, and it sounds like the surrounding municipalities and county are immediately adjacent. So-
Adjacent.
Immediately adjacent and across the street.
So
Right.
maybe the 100 feet is a good compromise?
150?
No, let's not increase it.
Yeah, I'm either way. It's fine. It's,
Is it to the edge of the property line? I mean.
it is.
From edge to edge? I don't-
These are what
how is
legal
it measured?
notices are sent out to.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Steve?
These are where the legal notices are actually sent to, not the
Yes.
blasts and
That's right.
local papers. So
That's right.
the other people outside of the adjacent properties will get notice, but it's not going to be a letter formally from the township.
Correct.
right.
How will they get noticed?
Well, that's the
Posting?
next question.
I mean, why not just notice the district?
It might not be in a district. It might be a single property, not in a district. Okay, I'm going with 100 unless
Well,
anybody.
I have a question. What,
Okay.
say these people are notified, there's a public hearing. What impact does their input have on the decision? I mean, is there a vote going to be taken by all present at the public hearing?
The
I'm
vote
not
will
sure
only
what the
be by the
process
commission.
is.
The vote is only by the commission. It's not by the entire speaking body, but everyone, any member of the public can come into a public meeting and talk about and try to plead their case as to whether they believe or don't believe something should happen. So every resident of the town of Minturn has the right to go into these historical preservation commission meetings and plead their case. It's just a matter of who gets the certified letter. Is it and it's the people that are going to be impacted the most. Those are the neighbors and those immediately across the street. If you went out 100 feet, probably not going to make that much of a difference. So I could go either way with the immediate or the properties, but the only people that get to vote are the people that serve on the board.
And I'm guessing there's cost consideration of this.
What was that, Kelly? You broke up.
I'm considering we should be thinking about the cost of sending out certified letters.
Agreed.
Yes.
What does the town do now with other legal entities? I mean,
We-
do they do immediately adjacent or do they go 100 feet out?
Steve, we go 250 feet out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so one mailing, in my experience, has been at least $70 just to notice some, what something's going on.
And when you get to the denser areas of town, like anything on Taylor or in the 100 block, that cost goes up significantly.
Exactly, yep, agreed.
And I'm seeing 100 feet as a compromise. And I'm going to move forward unless someone's really
Absolutely.
opposed. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Okay, best way to notice a hearing, rank in order of most to least effective. And again, this came up because of a real world situation where we lost a building and folks didn't know about it. So what did folks think was the most effective? And according to this, posted notice at the property is incredibly effective. And we were talking about the big poster board notices that you see stapled, usually stapled to the building or somewhere visibly on the property. After that, the town e-blast, we have about 640 folks signed up for the town e-blast. I do not know the percentage of them that are Minturn residents. I just should preface that. Next was legal in the paper, 2.53, and the website was 2.67. So next was website, then legal notice in the paper, and then an ad in the paper. So what you're all saying is you pay more attention to the legal notices in the paper than an ad. I think that's important for staff to make sure we understand, because we put a lot in the legals right now that people say they don't see, or they just don't read. So I want to make sure we're okay with that. Brian, go ahead.
Is this to choose one avenue or is this to choose the top three, or what is the thought behind the question?
So this is what is the direction to staff to how folks will get notified who are outside of that 100-foot radius. So if you're not receiving a letter, how are folks going to hear about this? And we want to, and the goal is to get the word out. The goal is to inform the residents or property owners or business owners. So we wanted to hear from this group what people think is the most effective.
Do we not have a posting place at the municipal offices as well? Because that should be considered, because I mean, yes, posted on the property is good, except for those that don't drive, they might not be able to see them. Those that don't subscribe to the e-blast or get on the web, we do have a large senior community that doesn't have access to some of our technology.
Yep.
But you know, they may walk to the post office or something like that. So I think, you know, continuing to post at least at the municipal complex is extremely important, in addition to any other options that we choose.
And I don't want to not take others' feedback, but that's a really good point. And that's where we notice planning commission agendas as well as council agendas. We have a posting box on Boulder Street on the post office side, and we have a posting box on Pine Street on the town hall side. And both of those, I think in this case, if it's going to be a formal commission established by the council, would be appropriate for noticing. And I do know of folks that use those posting boxes. So thanks, Shelley. Okay, so we'll notice the property. And I think that we'll try to use all of these, except maybe not the ad in the newspaper, if people feel legals are more valuable. The others are pretty easy for us to do with minimal cost. The legal, I think, is the only one that actually has a cost associated.
I think that is because it's in the same location and it's a mandatory, they have to put it in on a certain date versus an ad they can bump or move or hide on a, I mean, who knows, it's inconsistent in their location, therefore you can't depend on where you're looking for the ads.
That's a great point. Okay, we're moving on. Section 5, is the committee in favor of the requirement outlined in section 5? Stand by, I gotta go to my section 5. Subsection 1A under requirements. So this is alterations to listed properties. So if you're already a listed property on the Minturn register or in a historic district, what are the requirements to making alterations? So before carrying out any new construction, alteration, relocation, or demolition involving the exterior of any historic property or property within a historic, including non-contributing properties district, applicants and or property owners must first submit the proposed work to the commission under this section, as well as apply for any other permits required by code. And not, 87% of you said yes. So this is a pretty solid answer. If we want to talk about it, we can, but I don't see this changing.
Okay, just to bring up a different perspective before you go on, just real quick. I said no because to the point we talked about earlier, if there's only 6 meetings a year and you find out that you don't qualify or something like that, and you've already put the money and investment in all the other permits, now you're starting over again. I just wanted to pull that out there.
And I don't know who I would ask this to on this committee, but it seems to me like the historic commission would be the first step in the permitting process. Am I not?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I was getting at, but it says, and other permits, it infers that all at the same time. I'm like, I would do one before the other.
I agree. Okay. Question 11, does the committee agree with the criteria laid out in section 5, subsection 2A? A request for alteration shall be initiated by the applicants. Such application shall be submitted to the town for consideration. The application shall include anything the town deems necessary, including without limitation and as applicable, a description of the type of work proposed and its effect or impact upon the historic property or district or historic district, and plans and specifications showing the proposed exterior appearance with finishes, materials, samples of materials, and architectural design and detail. 66% said yes. We did have some other responses. If you said no.
I was one of the other responses. I just thought it was, if you pulled the language back down, I just thought the language starting out, so being anything the town wants, just seemed crazy that you would want to say it would include without limitation, the list of all these items and anything else the town reasonably requires. It just seemed like it was a little bit worded, a little bit in your face. And so that's why I declined to say yes, but I agree with the spirit of it. I just didn't like the wording.
So that might involve legal again.
Yeah, it's just
Yes.
it's a legal for sure, technical.
Okay. Other responses that we have on this, commission should be explicit on what is required, which was just discussed. Without limitation is too overreaching, which I think is in the same spirit of what Ken was identifying. Would like to see the required criteria be specifically listed, which I think again is in that same vein. Says, I worry about the language without limitation. Again, I feel open scope may result on some homeowners being overburdened in this process. And the application should be a portion of the planning commission review process. Please keep in mind the limited size of the district. Adding another layer of review seems unnecessary and could be incompatible with planning and zoning review. Okay.
I would like to say too, would this include repair? Like if someone has to repair a window, I'd hate for them to have to go through this process as long as, you know, they're not changing anything, but you know, I think basic maintenance should be excluded just to make sure the property stays maintained.
Is
You guys
there
can
a,
have- sorry.
sorry, I was gonna say in kind of where Kelly's going, is there a way that this commission can set certain work as maybe like an administrative approval, kind of like you would have with your design review board, you know, where, or your planning and zoning commission, where, you know, you're just changing out your windows to be more energy efficient, but they look exactly the same way they do today. So that would be more of like an administrative approval based on, you know, a certain criteria that your planner would go through. You know, meets this, looks the same, da, 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 da. Yes, I can administratively approve this, even though it falls within that district. That might be something that could be considered. And then that way, not every minor alteration / repair / maintenance has to go to the historic commission. And it's more of your, you know, you're changing out your siding, you're doing, you know,
Just repairing site. And time is limited. We have a small window of construction period. So it's
Right.
anything delays that really, it's hard for the person doing the work.
Right, even like a re-roof, you know, I mean, one of the reasons Mountain Peddler came down was because it was an unsafe building. You know, I mean, if anyone saw the roof, that was coming in, that was coming down, but you know, I mean, that's something that could potentially get repaired without having to do an entire demo of a building. So I think there's considerations we could put in here potentially, that there's some sort of administrator approval with an appeal process, kind of like your planning commission, if someone or a neighbor or the applicant disagrees with the determination. So
Yeah, you guys are right. That's totally normal to have a list of, you know, routine maintenance that doesn't necessarily need any approval, like replacing or repairing things under 100 square feet on your property. And then you could have an administrative approval process for replacement in kind or other types of projects. Windows specifically are kind of a like sticky topic in historic preservation, but yeah, there are lots of things that you could have on an administrative approval list or a routine maintenance list for your property owners.
Jim?
Jim, you're muted. Jim, you're muted. You're muted.
Under the definitions, alteration or alter, any act or process that changes one or more of the exterior architectural or landscape features of the building. That is the structure, the site, the object, or district. I think that definition, we probably need a definition in there that would say any kind of maintenance, such as, I don't know, if you want to include painting the exterior, fixing windows, as was mentioned, are not considered alterations.
In the building code, they are, so you have to be really careful with not calling a window replacement an alteration, because if in order to change your window, you do have to get a building permit in addition to this review. So not calling a window an alteration would be a conflict with the building code.
What about painting exteriors?
That's maintenance. That doesn't fall in the building code. That's
What
cosmetic.
happens if somebody wants to paint a building bright pink
They can do that.
without?
Minturn
any
allows that.
Correct. The planning commission, even with the DRB, does not regulate paint color.
In a historic district? That should be considered.
I agree. I think paint should be considered. It should
I
fit
would
with the
agree.
historic character of the area.
I would think that in the historic area, it would be fine, but that's one of the reasons people like Minturn is even in the historic district, we have some funky paint colors. Wouldn't want to limit them.
Yeah, I agree with 100% with Shelley.
I'm in.
Okay, so y'all, we're gonna move on, but I will get legal to help us with some wordsmithing on this, and to Jim's point as well with the definitions. So we can get this more specific on what would or would not be required, what could be handled at administrative approval, what's considered routine maintenance, what's considered replacement in kind, those types of things. So we'll get some legal work on that, and we'll come back to you with question 11. 12, does the committee agree with the criteria laid out in section 5, subsection 4C, review criteria for non-contributing properties? These are properties not on the list, but are within a historic district. Compatibility with the property's current design, materials, features, size, scale, and proportion, and massing, or compatibility with the historic district's design, materials, feature, size, scale, and proportion, and massing. So section 5, subsection 3, I will get to that right now.
Subsection 4C.
Thank you so much. 4C. 4C says, I don't like the numbering on this. Section,
We're gonna have to change it so that it matches up more with our code language.
right, section 5, subsection 4C. Let me go back to section 5, 4C. Okay, for non-contributing properties. So this is under review criteria for non-contributing properties within a historic district. In order to get something changed, it would have to be something that's, does it have to be compatible with the property's current design, materials, features, size, scale, proportion, and massing, compatible with the historic district's design, materials, features, size, scale, and proportion, and massing. That's for 5C. So I hope that clarified that, and 73% of you said yes. We did have some responses in the no section. One said, I have an issue with the bulk. Homes may have to be rebuilt, and undersizing them may be a great beneficial burden for someone without incentive, like in Aspen. If you build smaller, you get rewarded with the ability to sell square footage to someone else. The code would have to be flexible for this. Maybe a 2-foot height bonus could work, or a 5% increase in lot coverage for receiving properties outside of the historic area. There's lots of comments.
Jenna, was that first one yours?
It was, and the idea was, because if a lot of buildings are undersized and you're forcing someone who's a non-contributing, not part of whatever is going on, to also force them to remain undersized when they want to invest or reinvest in their home, I think that's problematic without some sort of incentive to keep it small. Fairness, especially when the zoning code allows you to build bigger. And that's when the code is in conflict with itself.
Thanks, Jenna. Another comment is there are too many types of quality of build and design of non-contributing properties in the potential. Does anyone want to speak to this one? Okay. The next one is not sure I agree that non-contributing structures need to be compatible. Sometimes a more modern design element addition can add impact to an adjacent property's historic nature. Anyone want to comment on that?
I do think you can have a modern building that complements a historic structure. They do it in Europe. You know, basalt, many Colorado towns have done a really good job, but they fit in. They don't have to be historic looking, but the scale, the colors, the patterns are, it can complement an old structure. I'm in for freedom of design personally, being from an architectural background, and I love how Europe has the ability to, and also Central America, to do a beautiful modern building next to an old building. And it's accepted by other communities throughout the world, but seems like America has a little bit of a problem with it.
I agree.
I agree to a point. I think bulk and mass is really important to consider when you're looking at it, and character. We need to define the character of this area, of these areas as well, because a brand new stucco building next to a bunch of, and I don't know that we have this anywhere in town, so just bear with me, but brand new 3-story stucco building next to 4 old let's just say log homes would not meet the character, and it likely wouldn't complement, but you could probably still get away with the size of the building if you change the exterior a bit, or you put some, change your roof designs, or a few other things, a few pieces, architectural elements that would help it match. But I think we need to, I think there should be some contributing, or some of these areas, the non-contributing, have to still meet the character of the, and the kind of like the compatibility with the neighborhood, I guess is what I'm saying.
Correct.
Brian?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I kind of agreed with the earlier comments as well, that based on, again, what is done in other historic districts that I've seen, where they actually push people away from, trying to mimic the historic buildings and encourage something that's more modern or differentiated. I do agree with the other comments, though, with regards to bulk and massing, and those are all things I think that can be taken into consideration during the review process. But I think we want to be careful not to lead people down a path where everything that's submitted is made to look like the old in cement board. It doesn't get us the right result.
I just don't want you guys to get sued.
Yeah, I would agree with all the comments as well, and strongly say that mimicking can really be devastating to a historic district. It just gives it a faux feel. So however we write this, it's the quality and the character, the alignment with the character and the quality, and some of the things that we see essential to the historic fabric is going to be really critical to nail those down.
Lindsay, you wanted to make a comment on that?
I was going to say that this particular subsection is for properties that are already constructed in the historic district. And then there's a second, well, it's subsection D under review criteria right underneath that talks about infill construction, that within the historic district, it should be differentiated from the historic properties, but be compatible. So that's another area that you can look at if if you have properties that are currently constructed, then they would basically not be required, obviously, to like match other properties in the historic district, but infill construction should be differentiated, but still fit in with the size and scale and other compatibility elements.
Bill?
Thank you.
Yeah, the last comment on was mine, and I think that, there are examples throughout the state, throughout the country, of places that force a historic continuity that never really comes through, that modern buildings can, and I agree with most of what I've heard from a lot of the people speaking prior to this, is that, for instance, a great example is Telluride. I mean, we've probably all been there. Telluride has a very strong historic district, and there's as you approach town, there's an area called Bachman Village, which was asked to, maintain the Victorian style, and it was so badly done. It's really an insult more to the historic district than a compliment to it. So I do think that there's an opportunity to put in buildings that are compatible with today's architecture instead of trying to replicate, particularly in a false way. And it's almost impossible to regulate the quality of the detailing that would be appropriate. So again, I agree with most of what I heard, and that last comment's mine.
I would agree with Bill.
I think I hear most of you saying similar comments with the complementing and compatibility and character. Jim?
Yeah, I have a question. What constitutes a historic district? In other words, if I live in the 600 block of Main Street, and if my building is approved as a historic building, do the homes around me also have to comply with these guidelines?
I'd look to Lindsay, but if you're not in a historic district, according to this, it would just be inclusive to your building, which is on the register.
Right, so you'd have your list of designated landmarks on the Minturn town register. That would just be individual properties throughout the town, but you can put into place a historic district that's a specific geographic area that would include all the properties within that district. And if they're contributing to the district, that means they still have their historic integrity, and non-contributing properties are the ones that maybe there's one or two commercial buildings that were built in 2000 or something. So that would be non-contributing to the district. So if you're in a residential area that's not in a historic district, but your house is on the landmark list, then you would, have different requirements put on you. And then the historic district is a geographic area that's defined.
Okay, so my house would not, say the 100 block would be declared a historic district because of the buildings that are there, but my house would not be considered a historic district, even though it's approved as a historic building. Is that correct?
It would be a landmark, essentially. So you have your individual landmarks and then districts that are groups of historic buildings.
Okay, so my neighbors would not be affected in any way by my home being designated as a historic building.
That's right. Unless you decided to have a historic district on your block or neighborhood. So it just depends on what you guys want to do in the future.
Okay, thanks.
Jenna?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what Lindsay said about a vacant lot. And like I said, so you have a vacant lot that you just paid $2 million for, and if everything else around you is small, you're going to make them build a small building. I think that's problematic. So Lindsay, are you saying that vacant lots are automatically, they're non-contributing, but they'll be kind of contributing? Is that how I'm understanding? It's very confusing.
So if it's in the historic district and you have a vacant lot that somebody wants to build a new building on, if you decide to adopt this criteria, which you don't have to have necessarily in your ordinance, then infill construction should be differentiated from historic properties, but still compatible. It's like the same wording with historic materials, features, size, scale, and proportion and massing. So that would kind of prevent somebody from building like a 4-story building if every other structure on the street is 1 story. So, you know, there are considerations to making it compatible if you don't want that type of thing.
Does that mean that, but if the zoning says you're allowed to build a 4-story building?
So then it would sort of be like an overlay district with zoning where you're.
That's what I figured.
Yeah, just in that specific area, you would be limited.
So along with the historic district, there's going to have to be an overlay zone district applied in order to avoid situations like that.
Well, it would go through the Historic Preservation Commission first, so you don't necessarily have to have an overlay district. It'd be sort of a de facto one.
Okay, I'm just trying to prevent Minturn from getting sued from what's allowed per zoning and what is something that's from a commission that wants to help, you know, make you do things to your building that you're not a fan of.
You want your, you know, planning and historic preservation to be working in concert. So it's definitely important to consider those.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and Jenna, and on that note is there might be, I know you guys are working on, you know, some of the stuff in chapter 16 right now, especially 100 block, but you know, that might be something that you work with the commission on so that there isn't the conflict in zoning regulations. Because I mean, the town adopts their own zoning regulations. The town's going to adopt their own historic zoning regulations as well. So we want them to match as much as we can in those district areas.
Absolutely, I agree. I'm just saying this is one more thing that staff needs to consider when they're putting this ordinance together, is that we got to take a look at all those sites and to make that, because I mean, you don't want to put the planning commission or the council in a bad position either if there's those conflicts, you know, with historic. So okay, and I love overlay districts; they work great, and we already have an overlay district. What's what PUDs are in town here, so it's not a jump, like a major jump. We just have to make a historical district overlay that needs to be applied. So good conversation, because I think that's important.
Yeah, and it makes it less confusing for property owners if everything works together too.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've got 3 more questions and I'm going to try to get through all of them before I let y'all go. This is directly in line with what everyone was just talking about. Does the committee agree with the review criteria that infill construction within historic districts shall be differentiated from the historic properties, but be compatible with the historic materials, features, size, scale, and proportion and massing to protect the integrity of the historic district and its environment? 66% of you said yes.
And this is the same in alignment from last time for me, just to make sure that the code allows is conformity or consistency.
And we did have some responses to this. Poorly, this is the last one, I don't know why I'm reading it first. Poorly executed applied historic detailing will detract from the authenticity of the district. I agree with the statement, but still am unsure about the compatibility requirements. Historic materials in Minturn are subpar to current day construction standards. Perhaps a percentage of the infill project should represent the features. And yes, except for size limitations or undersizing a home less than the code allows. Style, materials, and features, absolutely. We also still want ADUs throughout town. Another consideration is forcing people to underbuild.
Yeah, that was me. I do want to say that I come from a city that was incorporated in 1750, and buildings are changed over and storefronts are changed and so forth. And people are, you know, when you go down to the historic downtown waterfront from that time frame when the privateers came through, you can't tell the difference between stuff that was really that old and stuff that was made to look old. So I somewhat disagree about historic detailing. I think that building materials have come really far. And anyway, for the record.
What about the argument, Jenna, about authenticity? I mean, if everything's faux in 2021, even though it's supposed to look like 1889, I'm just throwing this out there as a devil's advocate.
No, I agree. But if we feel that the idea of a historic flavor needs to be established in Minturn, and people don't know the difference until that one historian comes through and balks to differ. I'm on the side. I think it's awesome when we're here to incentivize people to stop in town. We're here to put ourselves on the map as far as a place that people want to be and hang out and enjoy. I don't personally have a problem with it.
Okay. I'm not hearing from anybody else, so I'm going with you all want it to be compatible with the historic materials, features, size, scale, and proportion, and massing to protect the integrity.
Michelle, I was just going to make a comment that compatible is capitalized, so it's a defined term, and I think it's pretty broad and gives us a lot of flexibility here. So I just making that comment.
And compatible. Thank you, Ken. Compatible or compatibility is consistent or harmonious with location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, or association of an individual building, structure, object, or site, or of surrounding properties. So I would look to all of you, but I would say that's pretty open and available for interpretation by the commission.
Which is good.
Okay. 14. Is the committee supportive of section 7, subsection 1C, which reads, if a demolition approval is granted on any basis other than that of imminent hazard or economic hardship, see section 8, a certificate of appropriateness will be issued until a replacement reuse plan for the property has been approved by the town. And this was overwhelmingly yes. And I didn't ask for responses on that. Lindsay, can we just talk about this for a minute, because this kind of gets back to a little bit about our original issue that we had in town where we had a building go down and nothing's been put in its place.
Sure. Did you have specific questions about it, or?
Well, if we can talk about the certificate of appropriateness. So that means that for someone to bring down let me tell you how I understand this, and you can correct me that I'm wrong. So from what I understand, any building that's, I think, over 50 years old would have to get approval for demolition by the Historic Preservation Commission, unless it's deemed hazardous or there's an economic hardship. And I will say there's a lot to go through to prove economic hardship. That if it's 50 years or older, it has to go through the commission in order to be approved for demolition. And if it receives a certificate of appropriateness, which means it can be demolished, they still have to come back with a replacement plan for, or the reuse plan for the property. So the property in theory won't just sit as an empty lot. Is that correct?
Right, so essentially you'd have well, the certificate of appropriateness would require 2 decisions by the HPC. 1, that the demolition itself is approved, and then 2, that there is a replacement and reuse plan that's approved. So the certificate of appropriateness would be a 2-step process.
Is there a time limit on the replacement typically?
You could, well, I mean, they just wouldn't be able to demolish without a replacement.
I think what Kelly's asking though is, so the replacement plan has to be approved by the town, which means it would have to go through the planning, the replacement plan would have to go through the planning commission and the council and get approved. But so say that happens, the replacement plan is approved, they demolish the building. Is there a requirement for the turnaround on the new project starting? Am I getting that, Kelly? Okay.
Yeah.
You can put in like a time limit on the certificate of appropriateness being valid. So a certificate of appropriateness might be valid for 1 year, but and they have to get a building permit within that 1 year. Otherwise, they have to go back to HPC and go through the whole process again, which would be, that seems like a good punishment, quite arduous through this type of thing. Or or you can have other, ways to incentivize building through your ordinance, like having penalties if they haven't gotten a building permit within a certain time period.
I think this to me is very similar to something that occurs in the town of Vale where a demolition is done and there's no historic designation on any building in the town of Vale, so let's make that clear. But any home that gets demoed in the town of Vale has to provide, and they don't have an active or an approved design or building permit, they actually have to put up what we call a developer improvement agreement. It's a surety that shows that they're going to build. It has a set date on it. It has an expiration date on it. And if they don't pull the trigger to get their, the refunds would be given as soon as the building permit gets issued on this developer improvement agreement or this surety, letter of credit, whatever it may be, but it provides a way for the town to start. They basically get to take over control of that, not necessarily the property, but they get to start putting it back to the way it was with the money that was provided in the developer improvement agreement or the letter of credit or something like that. And then that way it's definitely incentivizes people to get it going, because I can tell you that I have some pretty substantial DIAs sitting in my office that people are going to want refunds on as soon as their building permit is issued, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's definitely an incentive.
That's a great hook. Yeah, I was trying to find where the meat in it was. Brian, I think Minturn might want to consider that option. Brian, you had a comment?
Yeah, Shelley's dead on. I mean, that's really, I think it's really important because it would be way too easy to demo with a crap approval and then just let it sit forever and end up with a resellable lot, which would be the devious intention from the beginning. So you really got to make that one stick.
Yeah.
Michelle, if I can comment, when you guys look at the other provision that deals with relocating historic buildings, we may have the same issue on the replacement.
Okay.
And so it might be a parallel place to look for this same kind of protection.
Thanks, Ken. I'm kind of excited right now because I really wasn't sure how that was going to go. And I was really worried about it because it was a real life issue that we had to deal with here in Minturn, and we're still dealing with it. And Shelley, thank you for working at the town of Vale. I think we have a real solution here.
Yeah, and there's other things you can do too. I mean, not that we want to see walls, but it might be an opportunity for murals or something if something gets delayed for some reason. Versus just an empty porta potty lot.
Right.
There are other remedies in the interim that we could consider as well to be flexible.
Jenna, you're kinder than I am. I want to stick it to them.
Who doesn't love the porta potty, Laura?
I know, I'm so sick of that damn thing.
I know.
Okay, we are on to our last, I think it's our last question. Thank you guys for hanging in there with me. Is 50 years old an appropriate age for review? This is under section 9. And I believe if I go to that section real quick, I think this is under demolition. This is for demolition of alteration to non-designated properties. Greater than 50 years old. So this is the one where if someone wants to alter their property and it's not listed either as a landmark, but if it's older than 50 years old, do they have to go through this process? So is 50 years old an appropriate age for review? Do we want to make it 75? There was that issue of how much do we want to put people through? Any permit application for alteration, relocation, or demolition of a non-designated property greater than 50 years old shall be reviewed by the commission to determine the eligibility of such property for listing on the town register. So I think it says yes here, but from what I've heard from the commission, folks seem to be willing to go longer age, older age is what I'm looking for.
I would go 5.
75.
Yeah, I mean, a trailer in 10 years will be 50 years old. It's a modular and really not the historic component. So it would slow down. Let's say they wanted to remove it. And there's not, what's the point? Just because it's old? No, again, I think there should be some criteria, not just age.
I agree with that because, there's a lot in Minturn that's going to be hitting over 50 years that if it's not within a designated area or a designated property, we want people to improve their properties.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed.
So, I think, 75 might be the minimum. But maybe you even go higher because unless it has a designation, and that's something that the commission is going to be looking at different locations in town. Does the commission care if my property, it's not 50 years old yet, but if someone wants to take down my house and put up a new single family, the commission's not going to want to review that. There's no historical designation of my house except that I lived in it for as long as I did, but that doesn't mean squat to the town of Minturn. So, I think that should be a higher number than 50.
I believe Boulder uses World War II as their point.
They use 50. Boulder and Boulder County are kind of unique, actually.
Were they?
But the one thing that this clause does do is protects your historic properties before the program is really up and running. So before you have, all these designated properties or a historic district in place, they would have to automatically go through review by the commission. So if you weren't able to get a historic district in place or something like that, this would still protect those properties and make them still have to get certificates of appropriateness. So that's a consideration.
It's going to make Southtown really cranky.
But you could Lindsay, could you remove this after the commission was up and running and got the districts and the locations and the tank and the sites and all of that stuff set up onto the historical list? I'm assuming that we can then go back and revise any of our ordinances like we do with everything else in the town.
Right, yeah, just be your normal ordinance process.
So this might not be a bad thing to start with. And then once districts are established and sites are established, then we change it.
Well, couldn't you narrow it down just a little bit according to, a map or something that goes with it of target areas versus just one size fits all? I mean, I think you're gonna make people pay more money to tear down old crappy houses by doing this.
And your hand was raised.
Yeah, I was going to jump in with a thought along those lines is there a way to say, whether it's 50 or 75, I think there's an argument that it should be 50 for a while and then you change it. But in any event, if your property's been reviewed and has not been designated, that it's excluded as well. Because there's going to be a review process where they're going to be going through a lot of properties. And if they pass on it, then you should be free. You don't have to come back.
I think that would be with the determination of eligibility. So if it's already had a determination within the past, 5 years or something,
yeah,
you could just keep that on file essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
It would just be another way to avoid unnecessarily catching houses that we don't, or structures we don't really want to catch, right?
And Brian, your hand is raised. And then I'm going to force some other people to talk because this is a big one. So Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with both of the last comments. There's no harm in being a little more restrictive out of the gate, because I promise you that if you leave loopholes, the people that aren't intended to slip through those loopholes will slip through them in the interim. So, whatever the house is that gets away with the 75-year mark will come down before you get to even look at it. So I would definitely lean towards going the 50 years and more restrictive out of the gate. Yeah, what you're going to inconvenience somebody because their process is going to be delayed by a month while they wait for the commission to take a look at it, and the commission is going to take a look at it. And if it's a no-brainer, it's a no-brainer. And it's not going to be a burden on the commission because it's going to take 15 minutes. So I mean, I definitely lean towards the more restrictive per the doctor's suggestion as well out of the gate. You're just leaving loopholes otherwise.
Agreed.
As long as it doesn't add extra cost to a local who doesn't have the extra cost to prove that their house is not worthy.
I can't see the cost the burden of cost falling on a local to defend themselves in that case. I mean, if anything, the cost is going to fall to the committee, which is going to be minor in a matter of time. I can't see the committee very, intentionally seeking to burden locals in that way. It just doesn't make sense.
So there are no staff members involved in the intermediary between the public and the commission?
Well, there's going to be some costs associated with all of this, but
exactly,
it's something that we there's been no establishment as, is there even an application fee, that, you have to pay this to go to the commission, is it $50? Is it, is it $100? Is it $1,000? I mean, I don't think it's going to be an undue burden. It's not going to cost someone hundreds of thousands of dollars to have the determination as to whether their house falls into this designation or not. I mean, I think we're talking pennies versus, it's not a redevelopment expense. So I mean, I think there should be, I agree. I think there needs to be parameters in there. I agree with what Brian just said, is those that are going to take advantage of it are going to take advantage of it from the word go. And they're going to get in here as quick as they can to get their properties redeveloped before this designation hits the books.
Okay, Jim, you got your hand raised, and I think we're going to wrap it up after this.
Yeah, I have I see this as maybe some legal problems with this, because are we going to require these owners to fill out go through the complete application process and come up with a plan as to how they're, what they're going to replace this building with and all this sort of thing. I think if we're imposing a full application process that's not been approved yet by the city council, we may be running into some legal issues, and that's all I'm suggesting.
I don't think we're imposing an application process, are we? Did I misunderstand that? Is it just it's a nod and a review, a minor review? It's not a full app.
There will be a process that's involved with that, and it's outlined in the ordinance. But this ordinance that we're working on right now will be something that is reviewed and considered by the town council. So we won't have this in place without a town council approval. So there will be a town council review and approval of this, as well as planning commission review and recommendation prior to any of this being enforceable.
But I think the question, or I guess what I was trying to clarify for myself at least, was if your house fell into this 50-year block and you wanted to do something, you don't have to necessarily go through a full application process. It's your house gets kicked over to the commission for some kind of minor structure review process that says, yes, you need to actually apply, or no, you're clear. Is that accurate?
Lindsay, I'd look to you to help make sure that we have that correct, how that would
work. The ordinance says that the applicant must submit a determination of eligibility form, but you guys can decide what you want on that. It says ownership, construction and alteration information, and photographs of the building currently, but you could also change that.
Form. And I believe the Historic Preservation Commission will create and approve that form.
But I think the point is that at that point, if that material is submitted and they say, okay, yeah, you're not historic, then you're done. You don't submit an application beyond that.
Right, and it could be pretty minor. That form could be, something you can fill out on your couch.
I would agree with that. It makes.
So just to be clear, you'd be done at the Historic Preservation Commission level, and depending on what you want to do, you would then go to Planning Commission.
Correct.
Exactly.
But I think that was the issue that was being raised earlier,
Right.
I think, by Jim.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is different from what the survey came up with. Kelly, you were going for 75. Are you comfortable, or is everyone comfortable with an initial age of 50 until we get everything kind of in lockstep with the program?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Lindsay, how long would you say? Is it like a 2 years or 1 year or?
I would say that's up to how fast the
Leave it up
commission
to the committee.
moves.
Leave it up to
Yeah.
the commission. Okay, got
I
it.
mean, if they move quickly, maybe within the first year, if they can get all their ducks in a row. And I don't know how fast it moves.
It makes sense to leave it up to them. Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. We made it. Thank you, everybody,
Very
so much
good.
for the feedback. Staff has a lot to go back and do, and we're going to get some legal involved to bring you all some language for your consideration on a couple of those hotter topic ones. So be on the lookout for the next meeting invite. It might be more than 2 weeks so that we have some time to take a look and get feedback from legal. And feel free, of course, to comment and send feedbacks anytime. And I think, Shelley, I wrote a note that I'm making some kind of comment or change on the Google Doc as well. I have to go back to my notes to see what I'm doing there. So thank you, everybody, for your time. Greatly appreciated, and we'll keep plugging forward.
Michelle, the comment on the Google Docs were
Yeah.
for people to, if the people on the committee and the board have comments, that they make them on the Google Doc so that everyone can see them. So if staff is responding to questions and comments, it should be done on the Google Doc and not like via email directly to Kelly that no one else can see the answer to. Because his question was on the doc, it should be everything, all of the correspondence should be there, is all.
Agree. The doc is meant to be a communication tool for everyone. Agree. So thank you all again. Greatly appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.